archetype, an archetype called the Defeatist archetype. The Defeatist archetype is a part of you that expects failure and accepts failure. And this stems from a desire to not experience harm, loss, and injury, where this archetype lives by the motto of, you just don't know how bad I've got it. So this archetype, the Defeatist archetype, has a fatalistic outlook on life, where you are ready to accept failure at the first sign of difficulty. So whenever the chips are down, when you've lost willpower, lost heart, feel demoralized, when what you desire is not forthcoming, when you think that the progress is hard, when you doubt things will turn out right, and when you've conceded to failure, this is when the Defeatist archetype mentality has arrived. The Defeatist is a trait that always focuses on how laborious, relentless, unrewarding and unachievable life is, finding every reasonable excuse to quit before you start or quit before you achieve. So let's discuss the 3 different types of defeatism. Let's start with avoidance defeat. The Defeatist archetype is a mindset of self-limiting beliefs and a poor attitude where you are doomed to failure before you even try to make something work. The defeatist has pessimistic thinking with the tendency to see the worst aspect of things and believe that the worst will happen. The defeatist in you is keen to avoid that which is hard, uncomfortable, unknown and uncertain because there is a fear of harm, loss and failure. The defeatist in you will cast doubts of, this will never work, I don't have the insert resources in this bracket, and it's too hard because of. And through these conceived failures, you never embark on that which you ideally prefer or dream about. Now, these doubts can be affirmed by past experiences of failure, and yet the past does not equal the future, especially when you try a different strategy. Furthermore, many doubts are limited beliefs that have no basis in reality, and so without proof, we can make these false premonitions that something will go wrong, where the false premonition then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And listen, there are some times that we do need to pay attention to our doubts and avoid certain things. There are times that we do need to avoid potential harms, losses and failures. And where it is appropriate and when it is necessary, it is sometimes best to concede that something won't work, especially when the risk outweighs the potential reward. And this comes down to investigation and discernment, the ability to accurately assess when something needs tackling or something needs avoiding altogether. We do, however, mistakenly tend to avoid things more often than not and concede that we can't do what is necessary to succeed, when actually, with enough grit, savvy and determination and the right strategy, we can succeed. And where we have ideals that we so badly want but don't go after them because of a defeatist mindset, then these ideals become a chink in the armor, this weakness in that we can't be or do better, this regret that we never pulled the trigger or never stayed the course. And so moving on from this, we get to the most common type of defeat, which is fatigued defeat, which means we quit when we're frustrated, tired, upset, and demoralized. So what do I mean by fatigued defeat? Well, the defeatist archetype is a trait that surrenders to and retreats back from situations that place a taxing demand on one's personal capacity. So whenever something or someone is making you feel psychologically and physically tired, drained and demoralized, The defeatist in you will get tired, lose faith, and perhaps choose to throw the towel in and abandon the situation altogether. Of course, there are times that we do need to stop banging the head against the brick wall, realize that our efforts are wasted, and then admit defeat, especially with activities and situations that don't make progress, and when dealing with people who can't respond in a manner that's conducive to our needs. Likewise, wherever we experience persistent frustration, stress, and upset, without any visible upside or evidence that things will improve, it's time to call it a day and move on. Nothing but suffering comes from chasing after a lost cause. We therefore need good judgment to choose our fights wisely, knowing for absolute certain if the battle is winnable before we start. Once we have started, to know when the battle is lost and not worth any more time and effort. That said, when making decisions when fatigued, they typically lead to a poor result. When feeling fatigued, that's when we are at our lowest and weakest ebb. When feeling down, we are most likely to conclude with a host of negative reasons and excuses why things aren't working out. Even though that might not be the actual case, because from a poor frame of mind, we tend to look at a situation from a downgraded point of view. And so sometimes we just need time out from a situation to adequately rest, recuperate, and reflect. And in most cases, when temporarily removing ourselves from a tough situation, we are lent the perspective to review where perhaps we have taken the wrong or inefficient approach. And within a neutral space, we can then devise a new strategy ready to restart the progress and with renewed determination. You see, with a proven strategy, enough time and persistence, most games in life are winnable. And sometimes a step back is just what we need to prepare for a resurgent comeback. Sometimes all it takes is just one new thought, one new idea, one more push that leads to ultimate victory. And this leads us on to actual defeats, where actual defeat comes with outward blame and inward blame, and where we project failures into future scenarios. So the defeatist is an archetypal trait that has developed as a result of experiencing some type of failure in the past that has resulted in a subtle to severe life-altering trauma. It could have been a failed business, failed relationship, failed career, failed activity or venture. And listen, failure is a fact of life. The pathway to success is littered with multiple failures. In everything that we try for the first time, we will almost always fail at it. Sometimes we must fail at the one thing and fail at the one thing multiple times until we succeed at it. Therefore, actual failure should be embraced as a necessary requirement to become skillful and succeed at something. We need to accept that we will get it wrong, make mistakes, be seen as incompetent when starting out on new ventures, counting each minor failure as a stepping stone towards the final result that we desire, gaining wisdom from each new step so that we become more refined and resilient with action. The defeatist archetype is, however, likely to respond to actual failure with outward blame, blaming the person, blaming the circumstance, blaming the conditions, or blaming the resources, etc., for being wrong. In which case, one would never take responsibility for their choices or realize how what they did or did not do had resulted in the failure. Until we take ownership of the failures in our life, we can't learn the wisdom and grow from them. As well as outward blame, there is inward blame. We accuse ourselves of being incompetent, unworthy, bad, and a failure. We can see ourselves as the problem and as the failure. But the thing is that failure is an event, not a person. And failure is the result of a behaviour, and behaviours can be changed to get a different result. And so to frown upon the self as the mistake or failure is wrong. It is not you that fails, it is what you knew and what you did that failed. And you can always change what you know and change what you do to get a successful result. However, as long as one continues to live with outward and inward blame and see both themselves and the other as the failure, then they are disempowered and blindsided to the possibility of change. To live with and live in a permanent state, a permanent thinking that you will always be a failure at something, means that the defeatist mindset will always compare present situations that are similar to the past from the lens of those past experiences that resulted in pain and loss. You will project those failures into present circumstances or an imagined future, and then make worst case scenario predictions that things won't work out and that they will end badly and fail. And because of that mindset, because of that premonition, that all becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So let's wrap up this summary about the detriments of the defeatist archetype. We start with imagining worst case scenarios with minimal upsides. If you are looking at situations and thinking about all of the negatives, all of the what could go wrongs, all of the ways it won't work, and at the same time you don't see how it could get better, you don't see the positive result, you don't see the way out and the way forward, what do you think this will do to your morale, confidence and motivation, right? It will sink like a ship that's hit a giant iceberg. And so by dwelling on the downside with little consideration for the upside, the defeatist within you is a mindset that will be projecting worst case scenarios, thinking of how the situation today or tomorrow will probably turn out disastrous like yesterday. Furthermore, this part of you will affirm those negative viewpoints by seeking counsel from cynical people. So this would be your friends or family members or even a stranger, where you ask them for advice about a situation in your life and they give you advice from a pessimistic perspective, and that perhaps they too are someone that quits before trying, and therefore they are likely to concur with your defeatist outlook. And furthermore, the defeatist within you is likely to consume information from newspapers, social media feeds and search engines that reinforces the negative beliefs that you can't do, have or achieve the things that you think are impossible, that you think is against you. Therefore, the defeatist within you quits before trying, rest and reconsideration. And it's very simple. If you never try, you will never succeed. It is in the trying and struggling and stumbling and succumbing and striving that we develop the character, the wisdom, the skills and the tenacity to hold position and push forward. But we must try. And when we do try, we learn to rest whenever we feel fatigued. We must rest so that we can recuperate. We must rest so that we can return back to our goals and ambitions, feeling recharged and ready for the next round of efforts and challenges. Just like a professional fighter will have 1 minute rests between each round. Just like professional tennis players will have a break between sets. The same ethos applies to life, whereby we have a process that aims towards an end goal, and during that process we take time out to recuperate. Which brings us to, without embracing failure, you will never succeed. That's because to succeed at something you must first fail at it, and often more than once. However, if you have a defeatist mindset, a quitter's mentality, that when the going gets tough, the knees get trembling, that thinks of the excuses, that looks for the out, where you are averse to the pains and losses and hardships of failure, then success will not come easy to you. It will come rarely, or it will not come at all. And so the ultimate problem with the defeatist mindset is that the defeatist does not realize that by quitting you can never win. The defeatist quits without starting, quits at the first hurdle, quits when the going gets tough, quits without a good fight, quits way too soon. And unfortunately, the defeatist cannot see that most situations are temporary, changeable, and conquerable. The defeatist does not realize that each time you quit, you must endure the pangs of failure, and you must endure the new efforts of starting all over again. And if you are someone that is always giving up on things, that quits before starting, that can never see the positive aspects of pursuing ambitions, then you can develop nihilistic thinking, resentment, and hopelessness. Because in every which way but win, the defeatist is a part of you that's thinking of how pointless, meaningless, undoable, and hopeless things are. This part of you can be hypercritical, skeptical, and doubtful towards many or most things in life. The defeatist archetype is a king of self-sabotage that can take you down a very dark pathway. The defeatist can develop nihilistic styles of thinking where, with resignation and resentment, you start to perceive the world as this hard, unfair, unfavorable, and impossible place where nothing good can or will ever happen to you. Where you start to lose the interest, motivation, and passion for life. Where you become bitter, scornful, dismissive, and dejected. Where you become less engaging, less adventurous, less curious, and more withdrawn, reclusive, and sedentary. And it is the cowardice, the living in fear of failure and fear of exposure, of the unknowns and the discomforts, that keeps one in a perpetual state of avoidance and rejection of anything that would take you out of your comfort zone and into the arena of personal growth. And the more you avoid and reject life, opportunities, and new experiences, the more you train your mind that things will never and cannot happen. You train yourself to believe that life is hopeless and pointless, and thus reinforce the mindset of a defeatist attitude. And now I want you to consider how the defeatist archetype is having a negative impact in your life. Where are you giving up in your life before you even start? Where are you throwing in the towel without going one more round to see if you can win? On the flip side of that, where are you still pursuing something and yet the result is just not happening, and therefore you need to stop what you're doing so that you can reassess the situation, so that you can figure out a better strategy to guarantee the result that you need, or that you must refocus your attention in a new direction or on a new objective. So give those questions some serious consideration and establish where the defeatist archetype is showing up in your life and having a detrimental impact on you. Which now brings us on to the fourth and final archetype in this webinar